I believe they didn't think that, you could go so far with it, and then you would have to alter the character and the nature of the show. I mean, if you did an on-screen love affair between Matt and Kitty, then, they'd have to marry or something, and then, you'd have a different show there. James Arness may have been the calm, stoic Marshal Matt Dillon on Gunsmoke, but behind the scenes things weren't always so smooth. For 20 years, he worked alongside countless co-stars. Most of them he respected, some he admired, but there was one co-star he simply could not stand. Who was it? Why did their on-screen chemistry mask such real-life tension? Today, we expose the single co-star James Arness secretly despised working with, and the fact may come as a shock. During 1955 to 1975, Gunsmoke ruled American television as the favorite Western series of the day. Central to all this was James Arness, whose acting as Marshal Matt Dillon became perhaps one of the most iconic characters ever to appear on television. With his imposing 6 feet 7 inches height and soothing, commanding demeanor, Arness introduced order and justice to Dodge City every week, entertaining viewers for 20 years. But although the show portrayed congruity and chemistry on television, life behind the cameras was less harmonious. Few audiences appreciated the fact that Arness had personal conflicts with one of his cast members, a tense relationship so challenging that he apparently wished the other actor would be taken off the show. To appreciate the origins of this controversy, it's worthwhile to go back and see how Gunsmoke rose to its status as a behemoth. The show started not on TV, but on radio in 1952, with William Conrad as voice of Marshal Dillon. Conrad's rich, authoritative voice beautifully captured the gritty frontier lawman, and the radio version was an instant success. It set the stage for the TV version's gritty writing and realistic Western ambience. When CBS introduced Gunsmoke to television in 1955, however, executives were looking for a more physically commanding actor to play Dillon. Although Conrad shone on radio, producers considered him too short for the image they had in mind for the screen. This choice touched off one of the greatest casting shifts in television history. John Wayne was at one time a consideration, but the Duke rejected the part, preferring not to work on the punishing schedule of a weekly show. Although Wayne refused the role, he did agree to suggest his friend James Arness. To assist in promoting its debut, Wayne actually made an introduction to the pilot episode, providing his star power in an effort to make the series legitimate. The risk paid off. Arness not only filled the role effortlessly, but created over time a performance so iconic that it equaled Wayne's own screen persona. His interpretation of Dillon anchored Gunsmoke for 20 years, forever cementing his spot in television history. That casting choice altered the face of television westerns forever. Arness didn't only appear to be a tough lawman, he embodied it. A decorated World War II combat veteran, he had received both the Bronze Star and the Purple Heart for his acts of valor in combat. That grit from real life carried over to the screen, lending his interpretation of Dillon a sense of realism that resonated with audiences instantly. Recruited into the military in 1943, Arness served with the 3rd Infantry Division in World War II. Only days after the Allied invasion at Anzio, Italy, he was hit by German machine gunfire and became severely wounded, changing his life forever. He lost part of his foot, damaged his knees, and spent several months in the hospital. Though he recovered enough to walk again, the pain never truly left him. These injuries followed him throughout his acting career, and especially during the 20 years he carried Gunsmoke. The production team often adjusted filming to help him manage the strain, scheduling physically demanding scenes in the mornings before the pain became unbearable. Despite it all, Arness's performance never faltered. His soft strength, tempered by those war scars, reflected Dillon's unyielding determination to do justice. That tenacity became his legend. Where Dillon was the embodiment of the guts to stand tall in Dodge City, Arness was the embodiment of the will to persevere through personal adversity in life. And although this resiliency made him a legend, it also added another layer of depth to the man behind the badge, possibly even assisting in explaining some of the tensions that came later with co-stars. Naturally, Gunsmoke was more than Arness alone. The series assembled an incredible cast whose on-screen chemistry assisted in fueling its longevity. Milburn Stone brought Doc Adams to life. Dennis Weaver played Chester Good prior to Ken Curtis's takeover as Festus Hagen. Then there was Amanda Blake as Miss Kitty Russell, the capable saloon owner and implied love interest of Matt Dillon. Blake's character had a very interesting backstory. On the original radio show, Miss Kitty was scripted openly as a madam, something that audiences at the time recognized, but the TV version was toned down to an open secret. Yet 1950s television played by much more rigid rules, and network executives struggled to keep Gunsmoke as family-oriented as possible. That meant Miss Kitty's original history was toned down for television. Rather than openly being depicted as a madam, her job was downplayed, and she was reconstructed as a respectable saloon keeper who ran the Long Branch with charm, autonomy, and the right measure of intrigue. The transformation succeeded. It made Kitty more accessible to audiences of every age without preventing Amanda Blake from infusing the role with warmth and depth. Her energetic acting made Miss Kitty a favorite of TV fans, making her a core part of the success of the show. Interestingly enough, Blake was not originally considered for the role. Producers had approached actress Polly Bond first to play Miss Kitty, who turned down the part, paving the way for Blake. After she took over the role, she raised Miss Kitty higher than anyone had anticipated, her combination of intelligence, toughness, and emotional complexity providing the character with longevity and keeping audiences watching week in and week out, waiting to see if her on-again, off-again affair with Marshall Dillon would ever go any further than lingering gazes and unspoken dialogue. Their slow burn turned into one of television's greatest unfollowed love affairs. But behind the scenes, the image wasn't so rosy. Although James Arness had a good relationship with most of his co-stars, his relationship with Amanda Blake was famously tense. On camera, fans loved the chemistry between the two stars, but off-camera, the two disputed consistently. Production crew members remembered constant arguments ranging from artistic differences to personal conflicts. Behind the scenes, Arness even made public that he wished Blake would depart the show entirely. But neither he nor Blake ever spoke publicly of these problems. To the public eye, they were still the ideal team, professional, charming, and convincing. The irony is poignant. The stolen looks and subtle moments of tenderness between Marshall Dillon and Miss Kitty were being acted by two performers who could hardly stand each other when the cameras weren't rolling. And yet, that same ability to put aside their differences and give good performances says volumes about their professionalism and about the gravity that Gunsmoke held as a cultural touchstone. The mere longevity of Gunsmoke meant that James Arness and Amanda Blake had to spend the screen and set together for all but 20 years. For any two actors, such constant closeness would be challenging. But for two strong personalities with very dissimilar temperaments, it became a formula for conflict. With time, their working relationship became a pressure cooker with frustrations seething under the surface and sometimes spilling over in private. So, what heated the tension? Creative differences strained their partnership early on. As Gunsmoke took off, Arness became increasingly influential in its direction. By the mid-1960s, he had won artistic control of scripts, casting, and the way storylines were treated. Amanda Blake, however, was no silent enforcer. She had her own ideas concerning Miss Kitty and frequently challenged Arness's ideas. Their greatest source of contention was the central question that bedeviled the series. What precisely was the nature of Matt Dillon and Miss Kitty's relationship? Blake allegedly wanted more romance, while Arness demanded the shows be kept simple, thinking mystery was part of the magic of the show. Aside from artistic conflicts, their personalities just didn't get along. Arness was notoriously a loner, holding himself apart when the cameras weren't rolling. He enjoyed being alone and liked to withdraw to his dressing room between scenes. Blake, however, was a live wire and social. She loved the banter of the set and frequently hosted parties for cast and crew. Her extroverted personality conflicted with Arness's introverted nature, and what would be a minor quibble initially became an enduring resentment with time. There was also a question of attention. As always, Dylan remained the focal point of Gunsmoke, but Miss Kitty's part increased consistently in the years that followed. Blake's performance clicked with viewers, particularly females, and she became a megastar overnight. Arness insiders later hinted that behind the scenes, Arness grumbled quietly about this change, fearing that Miss Kitty would steal the spotlight from Matt Dillon. Everything blended together to create a working rapport that, though professional on the outside, seethed with tension underneath. Yet another source of tension was the relentless pace of Gunsmoke itself. At its height, the series produced almost 40 episodes per season. Long workdays on set, long location shoots, and the physical demands of a Western all made for an environment in which fatigue was ubiquitous and tempers could boil over at any moment. For Arness, however, things were even more difficult. His wounds from the war never fully healed, and he was left with chronic pain and mobility issues that continued to grow worse as the years went by. By the 1960s, these injuries had become a daily challenge. As arthritis took hold, accommodations grew more complex, but chronic discomfort drained him. Crew members remembered that as the series matured, Arness became increasingly cantankerous on set, and this added pressure often spilled over into scenes with Blake. Revealing the romantic sparks between Dylan and Kitty required extended, intimate contact, something Arness at times found difficult to endure with pain in his system. Blake, on the other hand, might not have had a complete clue about the level of what her co-star was dealing with. His reserve could so easily be interpreted as being standoffish or short-tempered. Despite his personal frustrations, James Arness never let them translate into his professional work with Amanda Blake. Both knew that the success of Gunsmoke hinged on being professional, and they used their professionalism to create one of television's most authentic on-screen pairings. Ironically, though the two had a difficult time being decent to each other off-screen, their on-screen characters were the epitome of slow-burn romance. Fans spent years arguing over whether the relationship between Matt and Kitty was anything more than friendship, but in reality, the ambiguity was intentional. Producers intentionally left the romance vague so that the audience could read the nuances in whatever way they chose. Blake herself remained on the show for 19 of the 20 seasons before departing on her own terms.